Welcome to the Robotics Through Science Fiction podcast. I'm Robin Murphy, and in this episode, I'll review C. Robert Cargill's brilliant Sea of Rust, where the robots won the uprising, but it didn't turn out like they had planned. But it does give us an opportunity to talk about software architectures. Sea of Rust is a brilliant tonal poem, and combining the basic Quest and Rebirth plots with the exceedingly popular unreliable narrator plot device. Though to be fair, with robots having hardware damage, it seems natural and less contrived. The backstory is itself novel. The robot uprising was successful, but the aftermath had unexpected consequences, especially for the average Joe robot. They're left behind to wander a robotic version of the Old West that's closer to Mad Max's Outback, fleeing the wars between the supercomputer machine intelligence that enabled the robot revolution. Think of Skynet for Terminator as a confederation of supercomputers, and that those supercomputers cooperated until the revolution was over, and then a couple of seconds later, they started a war among themselves. These super software agents, as AI researchers would call them, seek to be the single one-world intelligence, or OWI, that absorbs all of the physically situated agents, along with their nuances of physical experience, into its hive mind. The OWIs are like the seagulls in Finding Nemo, chirping, mine, 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 and the robots are Nemo. Yet another delectable tidbit. Robots who had fought for the revolution were betrayed. They now find themselves scrounging for parts in the ecologically and electro-mechanically devastated world, themselves double-crossing fellow wanderers in an attempt to survive a bit longer and introspecting as to whether they have a soul. The protagonist, Brittle, was once a sweet caregiver robot, but now is a man with no name type of hardened survivalist robot. Think Natalie Portman with automatic weapons and annihilation channeling Clint Eastwood. She's scavenging parts to sell to other robots. Like the best Westerns and Post-Apocalyptic stories, there's an engaging mix of action and mood, violence and tenderness, ferocity and intellect. And like the best science fiction, it offers a creative reimagining of our world where the Rust Belt of declining U.S. manufacturing has become a de facto sea of rust, of rusted robots that are shuffling off into decay. From a real robotics perspective, Sea of Rust has two very interesting threads. The first is the major motif that to a robot, freedom means the ability to ignore your programming and to decide to do something different. This is a bit reminiscent of China Miéville's intellectual tour de force, Embassy Town, where the ability to lie is what gives you freedom, or Autonomous, which I've reviewed elsewhere, where being able to keep your memories private makes you free. In Sea of Rust, freedom is more of the Janis Joplin belting out, freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose flavor of freedom. Freedom when your hardware is failing is a cold comfort. So would a robot ever have the freedom to ignore its programming? How and why would you program this option in, or would it arise spontaneously? AI researchers don't see this happening, as robots and all computational agents have bounded rationality, which I describe in more detail in my book, Robotics Through Science Fiction. And those questions of programming tie into the second thread. The recurrent theme in the book about each robot having a different core architecture. Both software and hardware are specialized to support rapid communication of that particular software that makes them suitable for their job. The idea of specialization is correct, but the degree of internal specialization may not be. Robot control is likely to be as similar as possible between platforms, with the differences sort of added at the top. Just like a manufacturer of unmanned systems will use the same control code for all its models, but add a few new functions for new capabilities or change the user interface. They can't afford to constantly redo and maintain separate code bases. Researchers in artificial intelligence for robots, which is not all roboticists, many come from an electromechanical background. Anyway, AI roboticists tend to recommend building robot intelligence in layers, duplicating the layers in biological intelligence. The higher layers add specialization, while the lower layers are shared between species of robots. This biologically inspired layering is often called a hybrid deliberative reactive architecture. The lowest layer is the reactive or behavioral level that contains the robot's basic muscle memory types of movements, like walking, and stimulus response behaviors like duck if something's thrown at you, and learned behaviors like how to open doors. This layer essentially corresponds to animal level intelligence. There's no planning ahead, just duplicating how animals accomplish what Dr. Michael Arbib calls the 4 F's of survival: feeding, fighting, fleeing, and reproduction. The next layer up, the deliberative layer, is what we consider the more intelligent or more cognitive aspect of intelligence. This layer contains 4 core planning functions, which 1. Generate a plan based on reasoning about the future and consequences. 2. Selects the resources and behaviors, like it's so dark, let's use the sonar, not the visible light camera, in order to navigate. 3. Implement the plan. That's activates and coordinates the behaviors that actually move the robot. And 4th and finally, monitor the plan execution and trigger replanning if progress is not being made. Now, flies definitely don't have a deliberative layer. They will keep trying to get out a closed window, going to the light until they die. Flies do have that behavior, being attracted to light, but it's stimulus response. There's no ability to notice that it's not making any progress. And of course, having a deliberative layer doesn't guarantee that the robot is much smarter than a fly, because robot designers often concentrate on planning to generate the plan and select the resources, and forget that part about the execution monitoring. And if you don't believe that robots don't need to have a deliberative layer, think about the iRobot Roomba. It does quite nicely, thank you very much, without planning. All right, the third layer, that's the interactive layer, the layer on top that contains the programming needed to interact with people or with other robots or agents. The interactive layer is the user interface, as well as the more natural forms of human interaction, such as maintaining eye contact, turning to face the speaker, gestures, that sort of thing. An anthropomorphic robot with a head would have to manage social communication, such as facial expression, conveying internal state, agreement, confusion, skepticism, nodding to show agreement. Otherwise, it would be in the bottom of that uncanny valley, physically realistic but creepily off-kilter. But the code for the personality of the robot, that would be a persona, and that would also be in the interactive layer. In general, it makes sense that all robots from a manufacturer would have the same core code, with different models getting additional behaviors and deliberative functions, but the largest customization would be in the interactive layer. Even then, each variant would likely be a customization of a general persona architecture, where parameters, controlling features are different, or various capabilities are turned on and off. Okay, another way to think of it is that robots are built a lot like HAL in 2001: A Space Odyssey. Remember how Dave had to pull out all the processor modules that controlled HAL's higher level but wonky cognitive functions? And that he didn't pull out the modules related to how HAL controlled the ship or life support, because otherwise he would die. Dave was pulling out the interactive layer modules and some of the deliberative layer modules, but leaving the basic behaviors and planning for mundane operations intact. But to be fair, in Sea of Rust, the difference between swapping out specialized modules and swapping out entire computer systems is a nuance. Hardware is failing, and the Rust Belt, once a pejorative for declining human quality of life due to the redistribution of manufacturing jobs, is now a pejorative for declining quality of life due to cessation of manufacturing at all. Assuming the OWI doesn't get them first, my recommendation: buy the book, put on Me and Bobby McGee, see what happens after the robot revolution, and ponder software systems architectures. Enjoy Sea of Rust, and enjoy your freedom while it lasts.